Hello and welcome to another episode of the We Have a Meeting podcast. So today's guest is a fountain of knowledge. With over 2 decades of experience in sales, they have carved a niche for themselves as a dynamic sales strategist, advisor, and coach. He has not only empowered sales teams to achieve unprecedented success, but has also penned down invaluable insights in his best-selling books, including New Sales Simplified and Sales Management Simplified. Today's guest is Mike Weinberg. Mike, how are you?
Oh my gosh, Jack, thank you for having me. Zach, good to be here.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate that you are a very busy man. So we start the podcast the same way. Who are you and what problem do you solve?
Great question. What a great start. I'm a sales guy who loves sales, and the problem I solve is really what my passion is in business. It's helping salespeople and sales teams win more new sales. And when you invited me to be on the show, just seeing the name of your podcast was enough to entice me, right? Get the meeting. Like there's nothing more important than the meeting, and I know we'll go down that path in our dialogue today.
Okay, good stuff. So I guess just to give us an overview, people that want to work with you, where are they at? What are they struggling with? What kind of symptoms might they have?
Typically, they're not creating opportunities at the top of the pipeline, or they're not advancing and closing them. So sometimes I'm working with individual contributor sales people or sales teams who want to win more new sales. And there's a lot of salespeople, and I've been doing this in this format for about 15 years now. There are a lot of salespeople who are good when there's inbound demand, and they're good at fulfilling it. They're great at service, they're great at product, they're great at relationship, they're good at technical, they're problem solvers, they're wonderful relational people who care for customers really well. But there's a whole lot of people confused about hunting for new business and what does that look like and how do we create versus just chase business. And I would say that that's one of the biggest issues I see is lack of opportunity creation, lack of time focused on proactive pursuit, which leads to empty pipelines, which leads to all kinds of problems.
That leads on nicely to my first question. So I spotted in New Sales Simplified that you have this kind of distinction between new business generation and selling. So there's a follow-up question, but it might be worth you just starting off with what are the differences between those two in your world?
Zach, I love that. And nobody ever asked that question. Ever wants to talk about that. I think selling is such a broad term. I mean, all of us in some ways are in sales in one way or another. And what makes me crazy at times is that management takes a one-size-fits-all approach to sales talent management. But there's so many different aspects of selling, from maintaining relationships and preventing attrition to customer success to the technical aspect. I work with some salespeople that end up spending a lot of time chasing invoices to be paid, which may be an important function to their company. But in my world, and I'm going to use these words very intentionally, I like to say that there are only three verbs that matter in sales: create, advance, and close. So when I think about new business development, and that's really why the first book is titled New Sales Simplified, because what most companies want is more new sales. That's how we grow. And new sales can be new sales to existing accounts. To me, that's still proactive new business development. One of the biggest challenges I think we see today is people who are titled in their role territory manager or account manager, and they think their job is to caretake a territory, right? Or look after a group of existing customers and service them, which I would agree that is. But if you take that to an extreme, basically you have a bunch of people who view themselves or behave like glorified customer service reps, not business development people. The reason they let us make more money in sales is because you're growing revenue. And there is a big difference between someone who manages existing accounts and takes orders and serves the customer well with great attitude and lots of love and responsiveness. But that's not the same thing as penetrating and cross-selling and upselling and growing the business. So I'm very specific when I talk about new sales or new business development, Because whether you're penetrating, cross-selling, upselling existing accounts, or you're hunting for new accounts to acquire them, bring in new logos, depending on how our different clients talk about that. I think they're all valuable, but I'm not sure there's anything more valuable than a salesperson who can develop net new business.
And this might be a potentially loaded question, depends how you want to take it. In your experience, in your career, where have you seen the majority of the problems lie? Are they in the selling side, so fundamental sales skills you mentioned around chasing invoices, probably when you mess something up further downstream? Or is it in having a team who just cannot kick doors down, get meetings, start that brand new, net new piece? What's been the most common issue that you see?
I don't know if that's a loaded question, but maybe it's a pregnant question. I mean, there's so much in there we could unpack. Zach, when I'm sitting down with an executive who's frustrated that the team is not filling a pipeline and winning new business, sometimes what I find helpful is I'll say, let me put a few buckets of blame in front of you and let you attribute the blame to the lack of the sales success to these different categories. So I'll do that now. One of them could be the talent, the natural gifting, the DNA of the people on the team. You may have more people who are wired with the natural talent and gifting of being service-oriented and relational. I call these people zookeepers versus farmers in my sales management books, because the customer's alive and it has needs and it poops and someone's got to clean it up. Do you say guys say poop in the UK? Or you have a better way of saying it, probably. You probably have more colorful words, and you probably spell it more creative.
Exactly. That's the only difference.
Yeah. But the animal has needs, right? It gets sick and someone needs to take it to the veterinarian, and there are predators trying to eat it. Someone's got to protect it. Like, those are zookeepers. They're great people, but they don't always have the wiring to deal with the risk and the conflict and the rejection that comes from hunting. So how much of the lack of new business is the natural talent of the people? How much of it is the compensation plan, where you pay people in a way where you're driving the behavior of protecting relationships, but not necessarily rewarding them or making it worth doing the heavy lifting, the extra work to acquire new business? Like, I have a lot of companies I get brought into, and I look at the compensation plan, and there's no reason to hunt because it doesn't move the needle on compensation enough. And people who are getting paid technically variable commission, it's variable only on the spreadsheet. Those customers are going to buy those products from that client, whether or not the salesperson does much. So sometimes it's the talent of the person. Sometimes it's the compensation plan. Sometimes it's sales management that doesn't hold people accountable. And we're not posting scoreboards, and we're not doing pipeline reviews, and we don't put the heat on the salesperson in a good way, not in a degrading way, not in a micromanaging way, but we don't do good accountability. It's one of the most popular things I talk about with sales leaders. And then there's two other issues I like to put in front of them. I have to do with sales focus and sales skills. One of them is just, I'll call it the distraction bucket. Your salespeople work hard. It's not work ethic, but they work on other things other than those three verbs. They're not creating new deals. They're not advancing existing deals. They're not trying to close. They're fighting fires. They're delivering parts. They're sitting in onboarding meetings. They're chasing invoices, as we talked about. They're working. They're doing glorified service work, but they're not hunting. And they use the busyness of servicing their existing accounts or the other corporate things we put on their plate as a very convenient excuse for why they can't go pick up new business, because they don't have time, right? So it's a focused distraction thing. And then the last one is sales skills, which kills me, because as the sales nerd with the book on selling, I love to talk about telling a better story, securing more meetings, prospecting techniques, doing better consultative or consultative discovery, early stage sales calls, presenting with power, powering up our presentations. But if they don't spend the time selling because they're distracted, or they're the wrong person in the role, or we pay them stupidly, or we don't hold them accountable, sometimes selling skills is the least of the problems of the people that I talk to. So maybe that was a loaded question, because that was about the longest, most complete answer I could give you.
It was a good answer, Mike. I would say, so if we think about like the salespeople and the sales reps, then even I like to live by the phrase, even if something's not your fault, it's your responsibility. So we can get stoic and Buddhist on all of these things. So when when is the point where, in what kind of situations for salespeople, is it actually acceptable, if ever, to blame external factors and just rest on your laurels? When is it okay to blame the finger and say, listen, I've been hard done by, I've been set up for failure?
Wow. Another question nobody asks, and that's a tough one. Because what I hear you saying, Jack, is when is it okay to play the victim card and say, I'm sorry, boss, it's COVID, or I'm sorry, boss, in my territory, the economy is depressed compared to everywhere else in the country. My little patch, my geography is, there's very serious economic issues there. Or I'm selling into a sector, I have a lot of companies in the tech space. Well, they had a great run for many years. Last year was a very hard year for technology and SaaS companies. There were a lot of cutbacks with the interest rate hikes and inflation that tech sales really suffered. So it's easy for people to make those excuses. But what we typically find, right, is the top producers, I'll use a fancy phrase, they have internal locus of control. They say, it's mine, I own it, I'm responsible, I'll make it happen. And I'll tell you, I respect that. And I think most winners adopt that mentality. I love how you said it. It's like it's Jack said this, it's not my fault, but it is my problem, right? I've got to deal with it. And my best sales manager ever, who was a mentor to me and taught me a ton about sales leadership, and I quote him in almost every book. His name was Donnie Williams. Wonderful human being. When I would sit down with him and he was holding me accountable, and he would say, Mike, I'm looking at your numbers or your pipeline, and I'm not comfortable with where you are. And I would start to say, well, Donnie, in these two cities where I'm doing a lot of traveling, the advertising business is really down right now. And he would take off his glasses and he would look at me and goes, I hear you. That is really a tough one. What are you going to do about it? Because you're the CEO of your business and your territory, and you need to make your number. And I'm happy to help you, but what are you going to do? And the beauty of putting the pressure and the responsibility, the burden back on the salesperson is really powerful. But what I don't want people to hear me saying, though, is that there's not real factors. And there's times you're selling into economic headwinds, or something in your particular industry is really sour, or you happen to inherit. I have a young man I'm mentoring, a family friend of mine, whose company gave him a really crappy territory, right? He's not getting good customers. They gave him a whole list of accounts, and most of them were dead and need to be resurrected. And he's doing his very best, but he's not getting any easy opportunities. And other territories around him, there are bigger, better customers that dominate the market, and the people around him are selling a lot more, and he's tremendously frustrated. And that's real life. Now, he can't play the victim, but he needs to work really hard to prove himself to his bosses and make sure that they start rewarding him with some other opportunities. But those are real challenges.
You said there, Mike, a phrase that I love and I talk about myself. It's you're the CEO of your own business. So every little business, no matter if you are working for someone, you should treat it like you're your own little CEO, time management, all of those things. So for anybody that might just be starting a new sales role this year, or they're starting in sales for the first time, CEO of your own business, what does that mean, and what does that look like, Mike?
It's the beauty of sales. I went into sales, and I like to say it now, for 3 reasons: fun, freedom, and financial reward, right? There's a lot of independence when you're in an individual contributor sales role, which is one of the reasons sometimes I try to talk people out of going from being in a sales position to moving into management, because you don't have as much fun and you don't have as much freedom, right? And sometimes the reward isn't even better, just more politics and more administration and more pressure. So when I hear you ask, like, what does it mean to be the CEO of your territory? It means you own it. We're having this conversation. We're recording this very early, very, very early in 2024. I'd ask every salesperson hearing us, do you have a business plan for the year? Have you articulated the goals of what you're going to achieve and the strategies of how you're going to do it and the actions that you're committed to, whatever behaviors, and monitoring your key activities, right? And have you listed out some of the obstacles that may be in your way and how you're going to grow and develop this year? Like, CEOs have business plans. Like, I think every salesperson needs a personal plan that guides where they're going to go for the year, that forces you to reflect back on the past and plan for the future and just take stock of where you are. So it's having a plan. It's also taking ownership and realizing you have a lot of tools and resources at your disposal. In a lot of sales roles, you actually have the freedom to choose which customers will you spend time with. You strategically, of your existing accounts, I would argue they're not all created equally. They don't all deserve the same amount of time and attention. You're not the potato chip Frito-Lay salesperson or whatever the big chip manufacturer, right, is in your part of the UK, like running to grocery stores, like stocking shelves. You actually are a strategically thinking business developer person. So which existing customers are worth more time and attention? And if you're a hunter and your company hasn't given you a very specific list of the right strategic ideal profile prospective customers to pursue, then you need to do that on your own. You have a lot of say in deciding where you're going to spend your time and what approaches you're going to take and how you'll pursue opportunities and how you follow up. Those are all things an executive gets to do. It's one of the beautiful things about being in sales. There's a lot of freedom for creativity and independence, but that's also a very weighty responsibility to be the CEO.
I'm going to hit you with a word, Mike, that is one of those words that's used a lot, but I think probably rarely understood: mindset. So it seems like there's many different schools of thought. There's optimism in the face of everything, nihilism in the face of everything, perhaps indifference in the face of everything. What's your stance, and what are the practical takeaways to develop a strong mindset in the sales trenches?
Wow. I'm getting a workout here this morning with you. These are questions nobody asks. I think mindset is underrated. What are you telling yourself? I had a very hard text message exchange with a friend of mine yesterday who at times likes to see himself as a victim and is trying to, I'll say it this way, prosecute the past as opposed to look forward to the future and decide where he will put his mental energy and what will he focus on. And it's a conversation about mindset. I think in sales, what you believe and what's in your heart matter as much or more than your skill. So do you believe that you're doing this for good cause? Like, do you view yourself like other top salespeople do as a value creator, an advisor, a partner, a professional, a consultant, an expert, a problem solver? Because when you believe that, and my dad taught me this right when I moved into sales, he said, Mike, your goal in sales is to help your customer win. Your motivation is to make them as successful as possible. And as long as your goal is to help them win, you will always win. I'm like, oh my gosh, like that was 30 years ago. I think that was the foundation of my success as a salesperson and what I teach today. Because when you act that way, you act with integrity. This is the opposite of the, in the States here, we call it, the used car salesperson mentality, right? The slimy, cheesy, inauthentic, greedy, manipulative. Like that's not what I don't know one top salesperson in the entire world that's their characteristics, that behaves like that. So you operate from integrity. But the other thing is you put the customer's best interest first. And if you do that, you're always going to win. And I like to apply that mindset, Zach, to hunting and prospecting. I feel like a lot of salespeople are hesitant to go be proactive and pursue and bother and interrupt and initiate conversations with their prospects because they don't want to be that guy or that girl. They don't want to be the pest, the annoyance, the pushy salesperson. And I'm like, stop, time out. That's not who you are. You're not calling to bug them. You're calling to rescue them. You believe they're better off with you than with somebody else. You believe they have a problem for which you have a great solution. You're not calling to bug them. You're calling to save them. They're stuck. They're trapped. They need someone to guide them through this. You're going to pursue this conversation because you have their best interest at heart. If it's not a fit, it's not a fit. And I'll tell you that sellers that adopt the mindset that I just articulated, that my dad really drilled into me 30 years ago when I got into sales, you're going to win big because you're going to be willing to get out of your comfort zone and push a little bit past resistance because you know it's in the prospect's best interest to give you some time. So I think that's really important. And in every phase of the sales cycle, the customer realizes that you truly care about the outcome that they're going to get. and you become much more likable and much more trustworthy. So it's a biggie.
That's a great answer, and it sounds like what you're saying. There's a therapist called Marissa Peer. She's got this line that's tell yourself a better story around the mindset piece. So if you've got this story that's, like you said before, I'm bothering busy people, change the story and suddenly the state changes. It sounds like that's kind of what you're saying. It's all about that internal story that you're telling yourself, and if it's not working, tell yourself a better story.
I love the way you said that. I need to. Can you send me the link for that therapist? I'd like to read them. Or I think, yeah, tell a better story. I'm dealing with my friend on that very topic. What story are you telling yourself? What is the narrative here? Because you have choices. We have free agency as humans. We get to tell the story to ourselves and to the world that we want to tell. And that, I would say what you just said is as important as anything we could talk about regarding a sales skill. Because getting that mindset and that motivation right changes everything.
And when you're, it's probably a personal question, so obviously feel free to skip it. When you're dealing with your friend or having a difficult conversation in your personal life, how easy is it to put the salesman hat on and deal with the objections and use those skills in real life?
It's hard. It's hard because you are worried about the relationship and you care for the person who's hurting, and you live in this tension. I'm living in this tension all the time in business and in this particular friendship, where I want to help and encourage the person and be a source of support. But at the same time, I realize I have to do some strong truth telling, because if I don't balance those out, it's almost like good sales management. My mentor, Donnie, who I mentioned, this was his great philosophy, and he preached this to everybody, that sales management is the fine art of balancing encouraging the heart and kicking the ass. You love, you support, you encourage, and then you stick their nose in the results, and you have a high performance, results focused culture. And I'll say this, on the sales teams that marry those two principles together, they're really supportive of the salespeople. It's like a community. It's fun. They celebrate, they encourage, but they're also crazy focused on results, and there are scoreboards and high intense meetings, and it's super competitive. Like, you can't stop that type of sales culture. And I almost feel like that's a good example for how we need to be when we're in relationship with people. We need to be very loving and supportive, but we also have to tell the truth. And those two can go together well. And I appreciate you giving me some therapy, letting me talk this out in this recording, because I'm dealing with that with this particular friendship. So
these podcasts, they sometimes do feel like a therapy session by the end. So I'm glad.
Am I going to get an invoice for this? Are you going to bill me for?
And we're very expensive, Mike.
Okay.
So tools wise, you've got killer mindset now. You're kind of winning, you're optimistic, all of those different things. And in terms of like a salesperson's tools, you've got many different things. I know that you speak about them in your books. You've got cold calling, email, white papers, networking, all of these different things. Something that you talk about and say the most important weapon is the sales story. So for anybody that's not familiar with you and your kind of theories, what is a sales story, and why is it so important?
Yeah, I like to say that our story, and what is our story? It's our message. It's the messaging. It's the talking points we use. Some people will call it your pitch. It's your value proposition. It's the collection of what you would say when you're engaging with a prospective customer or a client. Things you would say in a voicemail or an email or in a live phone call to get a meeting. Some phrases you might use early in a live one-on-one or group meeting to position yourselves, your company, your solution. Probably some of the points that end up in a PowerPoint slide or end up in proposals. Like, it's the language you use when you talk about the value you bring. And I like to say it's our most important sales weapon. It's probably my favorite topic, and I've probably written about this, and I get asked to teach this almost more than any other topic, because everybody understands that when your messaging, when your sales story is strong and it's compelling and it's differentiating and it gets at the issues you address for your customers and the outcomes you help achieve, when you have a customer issue and outcome focused message, everything changes. And I say it's your most important weapon because, and you almost said this in the question, you use your sales story, your messaging, these talking points all the time, every day. They're in your social media profile. These talking points are in your phone calls and your voicemails. They're in your emails. You use them appropriately sprinkled throughout a sales call, and they're in your presentations and your proposals. So if your story, your messaging is awful, you're screwed. Like, I don't know how you could sell, and definitely don't know how you could prospect and get meetings if you're not confident in what you're saying. I have enough confidence in my own messaging. I'll talk to any CEO, any sales leader. If you give me 10 seconds, which is about what you get in a quick prospecting positioning sense to get someone's attention, or you give me 30 seconds after a quick introduction, or you give me a few minutes over a cup of coffee, I'm going to say exactly the right things to that particular executive that when I'm done with my 10 seconds or my 30 seconds, they're going to say to themselves, now that's interesting. You help people like me in organizations like mine. I want to know more. And I am desperate that every person who sells would have that level of confidence in their message, that they knew they had a few talking points, and maybe it's up to 10, 12, 20 talking points that they would apply in the right situation to the right persona or the right role of the prospective client they're talking to, that they would know they'd be saying things that were on the mind about the problems they solve, about the pains they remove, about the liabilities they reduce, about the opportunities that they help capture, about the improved results that they and their solution help their customers achieve. When we get that language down, everything changes in sales. When we're confident, we justify our premium price. Like if you're priced at a premium, if you're above the market, you need premium messaging. That's how you articulate the value that you're worth more and justify your higher price. When you have good messaging, you get meetings. You're less insecure about your pricing or to get commoditized. And one of the great things that happens, you change that dynamic, that emotional, awkward dynamic in the sales dance where the customer or the prospect is resisting because you're pitching product, our solution, our history, our company, our features, our demo, our founder, our processes. You said it your way there, right? You like that? Your processes, like all those things. We're so good at talking about our own stuff. But what does the customer care about? They care about what's in it for them. What problem are they trying to solve? And when you lead your story, whether it's your voicemail or it's the first thing you say during a live conversation, when you start talking about things that are on their mind instead of how great you, your company, and your solution are, instead of getting that resistance, the resistance comes down and they're like, okay, that's interesting. Why don't you tell me more? Sounds like you help people like me. And then the whole dynamic is different. It's powerful, very powerful.
You kind of alluded to it there a little bit, but I'd probably like to go a little bit deeper. It might this next bit might be a bit weird. Are you happy to go with me on it?
I am weird, so yes,
Good.
granted.
Okay. If you were to create like a template for a sales story that 100% didn't work, it was guaranteed to fail, and you had to make it guaranteed to fail, what would you include in that?
That's brilliant. It would start with the first 3 slides of a PowerPoint deck showing pictures of the company's buildings, followed by org charts of how your company is structured, followed by a big picture of the founder bragging about his brilliance, and then a chronology of all the company's history and all the companies they acquired, and then flow charts of our own processes and how absolutely freaking brilliant our engineers or our designers or whoever are. It would be self-focused garbage. We've been in business this long, and here's our history, and here's why we're so smart, and here's why we're so unique. It would be all of the self-focused things. And what's crazy as I say that is we all know this, and I'm sure there's some people cringing listening to us. That's how a lot of salespeople pitch. If you look at their website, if you look at the brochure, if you look at the About Us section right on that web page, if you look at a PowerPoint deck, if you even look at the software as a service, the SaaS salesperson who begs to get a meeting, and then the first thing they do is they want to demo their solution, and they just start clicking on pages and on features. And if we click here, this happens. And if we click here, this happens. Like, and you know nothing about the client, and you did nothing to set up why your solution even exists, because it solves this problem, it captures this opportunity, it reduces this cost, it makes this person more efficient. There's nothing about the outcome or the benefit. It's all self-focused. That's, if I wanted to write a really bad story, that's what it would sound like.
Beautiful, beautiful. We're going to ask you now, Mike, to be our therapist for a moment.
Uh-oh.
So One thing that's been tricky for us, sometimes we've interviewed people, they've ticked all the boxes, but there's this big question mark in tone. And then we think, well, maybe we can teach them, maybe we can educate them on how to have a better tone when they're doing the calls, when they're in the business, when they're working for us. The tone can improve, surely. They ticked all the other boxes. And it's one thing that we've never been able to teach someone how to improve. So my question to you is, can tone be improved? And if so, how?
Okay, let me clarify to make sure. As one of my other friends in the UK says, we are common people separated by a common language.
Yes,
When you say tone, are you referring to how somebody sounds, like the tone of their voice?
exactly.
Okay, wanted to make sure. So what I think you're referring to is what I've coined and other people have as well, the sales voice and the inauthentic, unnatural, overly enthusiastic, bizarre sounding tone that some amateur salespeople like to use when they're new or they're struggling because they feel like I should sound like a salesperson. And I've never seen that work. I've never been asked, can you get someone to change it? Except for the only thing I've seen really work is when you actually record them, potentially secretly, where you may record their phone call or sneak behind them with your camera and start a voice or a voice memo or a video. Because normal good salespeople don't sound like they're a salesperson. They sound like a normal person who's having an adult business conversation with another adult business person, right? We're not nagging. We're not pleading. We're not cheerleading. We talk in sales just like we talk with our brother or our sister or a good friend. Yes, we're respectful and we should be professional. And I'm not a big fan of the yo bro or dude and like the dumbing down of sales where it's so super casual, unless that's so prevalent in the industry that that's the norm for the way the people you call on talk. But the last thing we want to do is put the prospect up on a pedestal and bow down in reverence and be incredibly overly deferential and super respectful to the point where we don't look like we bring any value. But the tone thing, I think it's important. I mean, I want to sound comfortable and confident. And while I'm enthusiastic, that's my nature anyway, I'm also very calm when I'm selling because my attitude is I'm calling them because they have a problem. I have a great solution. They should want to talk to me. But if I come off like some guy who's reading a script and I'm faking it, and one of the big sales training companies, they've got offices in the UK and they're very big in the US. One of the things that drives me crazy about their training methodology is that they tend to get salespeople to act a certain way to make the customer feel a certain way. And I cannot tell you how opposed I am to that. Like acting is not, we're not on stage. We're not acting. We're normal people. And that's why people hate doing role play. So I don't call it role play. We call it practice. But we need to get salespeople talking in a natural, comfortable manner so that they're easy to hear. And because one of the things that makes me crazy, Zach, is this awkward adversarial dynamic that happens in a sales conversation where the salesperson is pitching and the client is sitting there like this with their arms folded, resisting because they're cynical, because it doesn't feel like a normal dialogue. It feels like some circus act going on. And I don't know if you resonate with how I'm saying that, but I am very conscious of how we come across, and tone is a big part of that.
It kind of sounds like, that old people buy from people, kind of sounds like you're saying people buy from people that sound like them. So almost to start off and think, how does this person that I deal with in this market actually talk, and how do I sound like them? Is that roughly what you're advocating?
I think roughly you said that better than I said it. Yes, roughly. Perfectly. Yes.
And then what about the other way? Sometimes we've had issues with this as well. So there's the scenario that you gave there of someone who's super inauthentically excitable, the kids TV presenter kind of thing going on. And then there's the other thing that people have taken, the let's calm this down and relax it so much that on the phone, because all the body language is lost, they actually sound like they're kind of half asleep, and the guy on the other end of the phone says, "You know what? I'm okay. I'll leave it there," without even really hearing what they've said. So I suppose, how can you help someone go the other way?
Yeah, I think you need to show them the truth. I will tell you, I'm a much better speaker in public today because I had to watch some very painful videos of myself in my early days on a stage. I mean, I remember this one day in particular, and this is probably 13 years ago. My first book was just about to come out, and I was starting to get asked to speak in some bigger venues. And I got this recording back from my own talk, and I had to watch it like through my fingers. I was cringing watching myself because you can't deny what you see and what you hear. And if we've got a salesperson who's half dead, we need to show them what half dead looks and sounds like. And yeah, I'm with you. I don't want cheesy, inauthentic, but I don't want dead, because if you don't care, if you don't care about solving the customer's problems, if you're not committed to getting the meeting, if you don't, that's why I love the name of your show. If you don't get the meeting, I don't think you have anything. So that's the one time you need to push. I never, ever, ever, ever push as hard in sales as I push than when I'm prospecting and I'm trying to get the meeting. Because I don't think this is when you qualify. You're not calling the telephone book. You're not randomly dialing people out of some automated list. You're pursuing hand-picked, strategically selected target accounts. We pick them for a reason. They look and smell and feel like our ideal customers, right? So I want to get the conversation. So when I'm pursuing someone, I'm not expecting to get a yes. I'm preparing for the no, but I'm going to be ready to push back to get that meeting. And if we have salespeople that are asleep or half dead and they're not interesting, or they're not fighting to get the meeting, what's the point? I think you can be persistent and alive and engaging without being inauthentic. And I think that's probably the balance we're trying to strive for there.
Like magic, Mike, you've managed to do it quite a few times throughout the chat so far. We end up at the point that I wanted to speak to you about,
Okay.
and I guess it might be a bit challenging at points, but you were just talking there about consistently pushing for the meeting. And I know in the book you speak about asking 3 times, and you talk about fit, visit, value, and one of the phrases I think is "visit with me anyway." For us, a meeting, a qualified meeting, is, do they have the problem and are they motivated to solve that problem? So based on your methodology, at what point is it just a waste of time, or at what point does it come across as pushy and needy as a salesperson, when it's a case of, well, just let me come in anyway? Because a lot of salespeople could go for that advice and just be really annoying and too persistent.
Okay, you brought up several topics there, which we should dialogue on together, because I would love to hear your take. Let me say this to start. In your fine country and ours, I believe the methodology we're going to talk about here works. And, I occasionally will stay up late at night on our C-SPAN government channel and watch, at least I used to in the old days, I haven't seen it in a while, Prime Minister's Questions. And I've never been asked harder questions. When I'm in a situation in your country, I'm amazed at the direct conversation that sometimes here in the States that we're supposed to be the aggressive ones, but there's times I feel like particularly Brits are so direct in their questioning and expecting accountability. And there's some level of respect for pushing, even though we don't want to be rude. But I will say, in your world and in my world, I think it's okay to push really hard for a conversation. I want to go back to the qualifying piece real quick, because I love what you said. They know they have a problem and there's some level of understanding or commitment to solve it. I agree with you 100%. The thing I would add from my own philosophy when it comes to prospecting, I see 1,000 salespeople failing from lack of meetings. For every one I see failing from too many meetings with unqualified prospects. So I'm all for qualifying. I tend, though, to push sellers to qualify in the discovery, the early stage meeting, not as much when they're prospecting, because if we're going to them, this is my own opinion, and I get pushback from a lot of my clients and a lot of my colleagues. It's okay. But I feel like if we're pursuing a prospect and we don't know where they are because we just chose them and there was no trigger, there was no news event, they just look like they should be a customer. When I'm in that initial conversation, I'm doing everything I can to get the meeting, even if it's not the right time. They're under contract with somebody else. They're not necessarily shopping, or they don't even know they have a problem. Because I feel like the relationship truly gets started when we get in that legitimate dialogue. So I'm slow to qualify in an early prospecting conversation because I figure, what's the worst thing that happens? I end up driving a few hours for a waste of time, or I have a virtual meeting that doesn't go anywhere. But I rather see a salesperson have the meeting. Now, I'm just curious for your take on that, and then we could talk about being pushy versus when is it too far. But I'm so hesitant to have salespeople qualify too much in that initial phone call because I don't know that we have so many rights or much power when we're the ones pursuing. I'm curious for your view on that.
I think you summed it up there. Like, context is key. So, like, if it's a case of you come to me, Mike, and you say, "Listen, Jack, I don't care what you do, get me in front of McDonald's," and I turn around to you and I say, "Listen, they don't have the problem. They're not motivated to solve it. They're in contract for the next 10 years." But they said they'll meet with you because, do you know what I mean? That they're being polite and they'll do anything for a free Burger King. I don't know, big competitors. Like, is that something? If you were our client and you said, "Just get me in front of McDonald's," and I said, "Well, I've done it, but this isn't going to go anywhere." It's the context is very important. I think that's why we deal on problem motivation. Is there an impact to the problem? And that's why our cold calls, we go off the methodology of, like, some cold calls are maybe 2-3 minutes. Do they have a bit of a problem? Cool, get them in the diary, we'll go further. We like our cold calls to feel like therapy, and it should be 10 to 15 minutes, purely because we're giving them to clients. And when they sit down in those calls, it's like, well, it's already done for me. Now it's a case of, like, how can I get them more emotional?
I totally understand, and I wasn't aware that was the setup. But in that case, I understand that there's a desire, and you're being paid for a higher level of qualification and setup, which is so you're creating a higher bar for yourselves on what an acceptable meeting is. And I think in that situation, I totally understand it, which is why what you're doing is so valuable to them, because it's not just setting a meeting; it's setting a much more qualified conversation. So I get that. That's really good.
I think from your point though, Mike, there's a thing of, if you were sitting your own meeting and you were keeping hold of it, there probably is an argument to be had of, I'll do the qualifying later because I still keep hold of it. But if you're booking a meeting for someone else, there's probably an issue there of they don't know the context beforehand. I think there's probably an argument
it's really good.
Both methodologies, but maybe one is more suited to booking for someone else, one's more suited to if you're keeping hold of the process.
Yeah, I think the way we could address this is some of it is about nomenclature, or how you view the linear sales process. Because in your way, what's really happening is, I feel like it's the first stage where it's prospecting, and then you're already getting into some level of discovery where this is more than a very short conversation, because you need to do this qualifying. So you've passed the point of them agreeing to have some conversation with you. And in that initial dialogue, you are now in a discovery conversation where if I'm going to be a sales nerd and dissect sales phases, what I would say is it progressed from a prospecting conversation into a legitimate discovery where now they're sharing about their world, and now you're moving it along. And at that point, you're then looking to set up the meeting for somebody else, which I totally understand. Because there's a lot of salespeople that have inside sales jobs. There may not be a second meeting, or they're selling something that's small and transactional, where if they do well in the early stage of the prospecting, and the person is legitimate and they have the need, it pivots right then into the actual sales call. And then what I coach in that point is, you're almost starting over, because you've gone from where you're below the prospect because you're just begging for some time, to where now you're on equal footing because they've agreed to have a conversation with you, just as if you scheduled a meeting. Because now they're like, okay, and so now we reset, share an agenda, position, to continue the discovery. And I feel like it's a different dynamic than when we're, in that disadvantaged position when we're prospecting, where it's very hard to succeed. That was some sales nerd stuff right there from the central US.
It's good stuff. Mike, I feel like we could talk to you all day. We're massive sales nerds, so I feel like we could geek out together. I guess let me ask you one last question. If I'm getting into sales for the first time this year, obviously one of the pieces of advice would be to go and buy all of your books and read them back to front and over again. But if you had to give some advice to somebody that is starting a sales job at the beginning of January, what piece of advice would you give them that will carry them throughout their whole career?
Boy, that's really good. I'll repeat my father's advice, and I'll add a little bit of basics. And first, I want to say thanks for this really energizing conversation. Second thing I would say is they don't need to buy all my books, but if you're new in sales, the book we've been talking about is New Sales Simplified, and that is really the book that's been known for a long time as a foundational book for, mastering the fundamental basics of selling. The advice I would give would go back to part of what my father said to me is understanding that sales is noble and that you're not there to push something on somebody or get them into a solution or a piece of equipment or to buy whatever your software is. That's not what your goal is. Your goal is to help them win, and you have their best interest at heart. I interviewed a gentleman on my podcast about a year ago, and the expression he used, he said, I became thick as thieves with my best customers. I said, what does that mean? He says, I got the customer to a place where they understood that I cared more about their success and I had their best interests ahead of my own. Like, if you adopt that philosophy as a professional salesperson, you will do fantastic. And the second thing I would say is you need to understand the basics of selling, which you may not find on LinkedIn, where there's a lot of very poor advice from people trying to get your attention and sell you some new magic potion. It's the fundamentals. It's the targeting of the right accounts. It's the messaging and getting really good language that articulates the problems you solve and the results you achieve. And then it's owning those few. There's not a whole lot of things you need to master in sales, but you have to be able to get a meeting and conduct a meeting. And you need to own your calendar and spend more time selling, deploying those 3 sales verbs: create, advance, and close. So if you're new, you don't need to learn the whole world. You just need to understand that you're there to serve. You're there to solve problems. You have to know whose business you want. You have to be able to tell some version of your story, and you have to be able to get a meeting and conduct a meeting. And if you can do those things, you're going to have a lot of success.
Great advice, and Mike, I've loved this conversation. It's been a brilliant conversation. If people want to work with you, check you out, find you, where should they do all those things?
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been completely energizing, and I love the thought and the questions you came up with. So thank you for this opportunity to visit with your audience. You can find me at my website, Mike Weinberg, WEINBERG, MikeWeinberg.com. On socials, it's Mike_Weinberg.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mike.
Cheers, friends. Thank you.
Thank you.